Please welcome to the stage MarkLogic founder and chief architect, Christopher Lindblad, and MarkLogic EVP of product, Joe Pasqua.
All right. So before we jump in and before Chris and I start chatting a bit, I want to take a moment to ask all of you some questions. So first of all, who today has heard about entity services? Okay, who understood it? Pretty good, pretty good. How about encryption, element level security, and redaction? Okay, just about everybody. Okay, how many of you now, having heard about them, can think about a place in your own organization where you might want to apply element level security or redaction? Yeah, that's what I thought. So I've got to say that those two features, since the day we've started talking about what's in MarkLogic 9, have been ones that almost universally people have said, yeah, that's something I need in my organization right away. So how many of you put together entity services and redaction in your minds and realize that you can extend entity services to keep track of information about your entities, like the kinds of things that you ought to be redacting? Ooh, David figured it out. Okay, that's not fair. So that's a really cool thing. So these features really play together. You can take the people from your governance team and have them annotate your entities with information about, hey, these 5 things are PII. I've got to keep track of those. I want to apply redaction rules to them. So that's pretty cool. And I would just say, by the way, that this was just mentioned a second ago, we've got workshops tomorrow. We've got workshops on multi-model. We've got workshops on security. We've got workshops on Data Hub Framework. If you're not signed up yet, but you do want to attend a workshop, please see Tanya Smirnov tonight or before tomorrow sometime to get signed up, because those are really valuable hands-on sessions. Just one last thing I want to mention is, or ask you to think about, is what's sort of the most interesting thing that you heard while you were here today? What's the phrase or the idea that sticks in your head? And I'll tell you what mine is, and I want you to think about what yours are, and then tweet them out or share them with your colleagues. The thing I heard today, actually, in one of Christy Harrigan's sessions, she was talking about regulation and the right to be forgotten regulation, and the idea that somebody's supposed to be able to tell you, please forget about me. And she said, how am I supposed to remember the people I'm supposed to forget? Which is kind of the question you don't necessarily think about all the time. And then the last thing really is start thinking of questions of your own that you want to pose to Chris. He and I will chat for a while, and then we'll open it up to take questions from all of you. So start thinking about what you want to ask. All right, so let's jump in. Okay. Christopher, so one of the things that I always get asked at these conferences is, what's Christopher Lindblad really like? And what does he do? So what does Christopher do all day? Does he still work on code? Does he just pontificate about things? What does Christopher do? So tell us about your day.
Yeah, I'll tell you my, and for those at MarkLogic, you can all attest that this is my day. I live, MarkLogic headquarters is in the Bay Area, and whereas maybe traffic may not be as bad as here in London, we don't have the underground. So I have a pretty good commute to work, or pretty bad commute. So I have an early morning schedule. I pretty much get into work at 5 in the morning. So I'm not only the first employee of the company, I'm the first employee every day. So I have an early morning day. That actually is I like it because I can go through email, Since we're spread out across the world, there's already here, stuff going on here in London and on the East Coast. And so I'll go through email, I'll fix some bugs, I'll come in and fix a bug. And so I try to get a lot of work done early in the morning, and then around mid-morning when everybody else shows up, there are meetings. And we're always working on the next release. Right now, we're working on the next release. And so there are planning meetings. I like to talk to all the engineering leads. We are in constantly working out what we want to do next and what's the best way of doing that. So pretty much I am fixing bugs, reading emails. I read all the support emails. So if you are working with support, I know it. I read it all. You won't hear a response from me because it goes through support, but I pay attention to all the support cases, and so that's something I wanted you to know, that I am aware of all the support problems, so pretty much by the early afternoon I'm heading home, but of course like us all, once I get home it's back onto email. But that's pretty much my day. I come to work every day, and I like to do development. Yeah.
So when you get an answer from support, and then 10 minutes later you get another email from them with a...
Like, yeah, yes. That happens all too often.
That's because Chris interjected afterwards.
It said, well, actually, there's lots of emails I send, and it's like, actually, this is after their reply. They haven't complained that much to me, but I know it's kind of annoying. But yeah.
All right. Okay. So that's what you do all day. Let's talk about kind of future directions and starting with hardware. Where's hardware going, and in particular, where's hardware going as it impacts the database?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's I'm most excited about in hardware is the whole solid-state storage. I think I was just at the Intel talk today. I'm really excited about the solid-state storage stuff they're doing. The reason why is over the last 2 decades, we see from Intel is huge advancements in processor performance, also huge advances in memory capacity. But hard disks are pretty much the same as they've been for the last 25 years. And so I think that memory and CPU have done all this advancement, but storage has really lagged. So I think that is what's really there's going to be this big catch-up happening. And as it applies to databases, I think that it's a really great thing, because I think databases are pretty much bottlenecked on how fast storage could be. So I see that as a really exciting thing in the database world. Yeah.
So we get fast storage and lots of it, but are we just going to treat it like a faster disk, or are we going to do something more fundamental than that?
Well, I think a lot of stuff that we do in MarkLogic still is very valid, still stays the same. I think Mary just did a really great job describing how a lot of how MarkLogic works in her talk. And I think that's all. Maybe it's not as far as hiking to Naples, but maybe it'll just be, I don't know, something closer. But I think that still memory has hierarchy, still that all of computing is about putting things close to you. And so there's certainly caching technologies. So that is not going to be the big driver for change. I think that there'll be other big drivers for change in MarkLogic.
Okay, so then how is these new hardware architectures, how are they going to get exposed? So, and what I mean by that is if we want to think about them differently and treat them differently, are the cloud providers going to expose instance types that have these new memory architectures? How are we going to be able to consume the new stuff?
That's a good question. I think that I think the cloud providers are working out some fairly exotic instance types. Perhaps they will. Already you can get cloud instances with some storage on them, solid-state storage. The way it looks to the operating system, I actually am of the school that I think a file system is actually a pretty good abstraction for storage, even if the storage is really fast. I think that naming things and having a hierarchical directory system, I don't think that's going to go away even when storage is really fast, because that's more about how to organize things and less of an artifact about how fast the storage is.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned cloud, so let's go to cloud. So what's the right approach, again, from a database perspective, for moving to the cloud? What should database vendors do and be thinking about in moving to the cloud and providing database services in the cloud?
Yeah, it's good that you said from the point of view of a database vendor. We're a database company, we're not a cloud company, so we focus on trying to make the best database software we can. And so from my point of view is I would like to focus on what do you want out of a database. I think if you're a cloud vendor, it's going to be more of how can we get people to make more use of our cloud. So they may provide basic kind of database technology, but we're really oriented towards making a database as much as we can. So we focus a lot on the database aspect of it. I kind of think of cloud vendors, and they're I very much think of them as it's similar to operating system vendors of perhaps the 80s or the 90s. Remember, in the 80s, there were like 5 different kinds of Unixes out there and various other things, VMS. I tend to think that cloud is like that right now, that that if you think of a cloud as an operating system where there's Amazons and there's Googles and there's Oracles, and I think eventually that things will settle out, that there will be some sort of open standard way to think about the cloud technologies, but we're quite a ways from that. So I tend to think of it as a platform, like an operating system platform, and we're very much thinking about building our database to run on a platform that may be a particular cloud.
Okay, well then, if you extend that analogy, what happens when the operating system vendors start supplying databases?
Yeah, I think that Gary made the point earlier that there's this whole issue about lock-in. The whole point, a lot of the cloud vendors are providing database capabilities that are their particular databases to really lock you in, get you a stable, secure customer from their point of view. They have you and they know you can't go without a great cost. So we don't need to do that. I think that as a database company, I want to be agnostic as to whether you want to run in a private cloud, whether you want to run in a public cloud, which cloud vendor. I think that's probably a better approach, because then that gives you the ability to move from one vendor to the other and not be locked in.
Yeah, it's when we talk about cloud neutrality, I'm reminded of the AWS event. I think it was this year. They showed that they have a new service now where they will send a semi-truck to your operation, so you can load your data on this semi and they will drive it to an Amazon data center and load it there, because that's the highest bandwidth way to get your data into their cloud, which is really cool. But they never talked about a truck that would get your data out of the cloud.
Yeah.
If you want to get the data out, you've got to drive up there in your Toyota Camry and take it out a little bit at a time. They don't make that part easy.
Yeah.
So cloud, you can't talk about the cloud without talking about security. And I was just mentioning a minute ago all the things that are going on with MarkLogic 9 and security.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, what is it in MarkLogic 9 from the security perspective that's most important to you?
Yeah, I really, we can't emphasize this enough. I mean, we have, I mean, you just heard it in earlier, the lightning talk, that we worked really hard in MarkLogic 9 to add security features. I think that the what we call the encryption at rest is a pretty cool capability. What is MarkLogic is now what it stores on the file system is encrypted. So the only way to get to it is through MarkLogic and through the MarkLogic security mechanism. So if you're not authorized through MarkLogic, you won't be able to get the data. So that's pretty cool. Another aspect that we spent a great deal of effort is the protected paths, is the implementation, what we're calling element level security, is being able to now, not just at the document level, but at particular elements within the document, to apply permissions. And that actually took quite a bit of implementation. But we're pretty proud of how it came out. We spent a lot of work so that it works pretty well and is pretty simple to use.
So let me give you a little background on element level security, and this is another Christopher characteristic. When we first started talking about element level security, Chris said, no, we can't do that, it's impossible. Yeah. And no, we can't do that, it won't perform, and we always have to perform well. And Christopher told me that until the moment when he figured out how to do it. And then it wasn't impossible, it was just hard. Yeah. And for Christopher, impossible is just an infinite amount of hard. So once he takes it down from an infinite amount to a non-infinite amount, it becomes possible. So that was the story behind element level security. You know, we've been requested this kind of feature from our government customers for a while. Once we started really understanding the broad applicability of it, Christopher and the team really sort of sat down and figured out how to make it possible and make it performant at the same time. That's really, I think, was one of the key challenges.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to add, you know, what kind of makes it particularly hard is we don't just, you know, when you retrieve documents and you look at them, we don't just hide the data right there. We need to hide it if you do an aggregate. If you've configured a range index or something and you're not allowed to see that element in a document, you shouldn't be able to see the values elsewhere. And so it's not just about protecting particular elements within documents. It's now all the ways we've indexed those elements, we've got to protect you from seeing that too. And so it's actually pretty complicated. Yeah.
And one of the things I really like about just generally the security features that we focused on in MarkLogic 9 is that we looked at and listened to all of you in the customer base, and we heard two things. One is I absolutely want to share my data more. I want to leverage my data. I want to take advantage of it. I want to get that competitive edge that bringing together all this data and all this insight will give me. So you're telling us that on the one hand, and on the other hand, you're saying that, but you know, please keep us off the front page of the New York Times or the London Times. We don't want to be the next one that's called out on a data breach. We don't want to get a $1 billion regulatory fine for leaking PII. So there's these two conflicting goals of I want to use my data more, I want to share it with researchers, I want to give it to other people, and then I want to keep it locked down. So how do you do both of those? How do you share more but at the same time have less risk? And that's a lot of what drove element level security. It's a lot of what drove redaction and anonymization. And all of those mechanisms allow you to share more, but be comfortable that you're not leaking PII or not leaking your corporate jewels. And I think that's that combination of being more secure. I mean, if you want something to be secure, it's really easy. Just dig a 6-foot hole, drop a computer in it, and cover it with concrete. It's really easy to be secure. It's hard to be secure and also make use of your data. And that's where I think we focused a lot in MarkLogic 9. Okay, so all right, so let's back up a little bit and talk about the database industry in general. Where do you see the industry going, and where do you see us going as leaders in the industry?
Yeah. What I see, an interesting direction, for me, the interesting area of the databases is into the smarter databases. Certainly I am not that interested in MarkLogic to just store and retrieve. Here's something with its name. I'm going to ask for it later. I really, and you can see it a lot in MarkLogic. I'm interested in indexes and being able to answer questions. And so for me, that's what new technologies, what can we do, and so that people can ask new questions of your data, or even perhaps MarkLogic can tell you something about your data without even you asking. So I think a big trend that I'm particularly interested in is smarter databases, simpler to use databases. They're not necessarily simpler in implementation, but making it easier to use the database and having the database do more.
So does smart database equal AI, or is it more or less or different?
Perhaps. Certainly, I think that some AI technologies could be applied to databases. We're looking at that. I don't have anything yet on that, but that's an idea. We do have some stuff already. But we're not calling it AI.
Because it works.
Yeah, because it works. Yeah. Yeah. We do feature vectors and yeah, but well, you have to be an AI guy to know that.
So, and you're an AI guy.
Yeah.
So tell me different dimensions of being smarter. Does being smarter also apply to I'm smarter about optimizing queries, or what's the breadth of being smarter?
Yeah, what I would like is the databases to be to tell you more about what's in your data. To be AI is an example. We use we've talked about semantics. I think that you can be smarter by having various indexes and query approaches, being able to extract information from the documents, and pretty much learning from learning things that you may not already know from your document. What I want you to be able to do with a database is to actually have knowledge about what's in your data, and less of a kind of a mechanical storage mechanism, more of trying to get insights about your customers, about your business, at the same time of running your business.
Right. Okay, so I'm gonna take a break for a moment and go to the audience. I have more questions, but I'll stop now and go to the audience. If we run out of questions there, we'll come back to my list.
And we have a microphone. Couple microphones here, so.
Yeah, my question is, what are the plans for MarkLogic 10? What's on the roadmap, and when can we see the first public beta of this?
Yes. I think he just took one of Joe's questions, or not. But, that's what's on the plan for MarkLogic 10. Well, no specific details yet. We're actually in the process of figuring out what we want to do in MarkLogic 10. But I'll tell you that there are definite areas where we want to improve the product. A couple areas we want to improve the product in terms of operations. We talked about Obstructor here. I think there's a whole lot more we can do in Obstructor. Right now, Obstructor, it's a pretty good analytic tool for figuring out what's going on in your MarkLogic clusters. We want to be able for you to actually manage your MarkLogic clusters, to grow them, to shrink them, to do active management from Obstructor. So I could see a lot of improvement in Obstructor. I also want to see a lot of improvement in what I call it is kind of the data modeling. We talked a lot about the envelope pattern and a lot about how to model your data, making it simpler to get your data ingested, configured. And so we're looking in areas there. Now, there's also all that other stuff we do, but the big themes, I think, are getting Obstructor even more what it is, and also really making it easier to get your data into MarkLogic.
Yeah, and how many of you heard about the Data Hub framework while you were here? Okay, so Data Hub framework is not technically part of the product. It's an open source capability that sits on top of the product and allows you to build data hubs really easily. We're going to continue in that vein as well. So we're going to continue to invest in things around the product that make the product easier to consume, easier to get value from very quickly. And we're going to extend out the kinds of things, and this relates exactly to what Chris was just saying, the kinds of tools that you use to, you're putting your entities into this data hub. How do you specify those entities? How do you model them? How do you show the relationships between them? And move more towards the idea of a whole data workbench. Mm-hmm. So you have tools that will help you throughout the process of discovering your data, analyzing what it is and how it should be modeled, creating those entities, putting it in a data hub, querying that data hub, getting data out on the other end. So I think you'll see us filling out the product areas that mm-hmm. That we just mentioned, but also some of the ecosystem around the product as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, who is? Right. Okay, here we go. Here.
Hi, I've got a couple of questions about security, the new features on that. We've been playing with them for about a year now, from very early access part of it. So we have protected paths that's baked all the way into security, all the way through, and I can guarantee to my clients that if it's defined properly, mm-hmm. you'll never see it. And that's wonderful, and it replaces, in some cases for us, it'll replace having to do transformations on the way out to hide data. So that's great. So then we take redaction. Mm-hmm. So in first level, it looks similar because I'm using XPath to define everything. But it's actually, even though it's under the security release, it's not secure in that there's nothing in MarkLogic guarantees that I use it. So you have a client that says, guarantee that they can't, one person can't see social security numbers. I can do that, element level security. Guarantee that someone can only see the last 4 digits of a social security number. I'll do that through redaction. But it's not guaranteed because I have to actually put that into my actual programming. So there's a little funny, the difference there, because it looks similar at first until you really get into it. Had you ever considered on the element level security of offering a feature like redaction, predictive redaction or something as that feature, so I can guarantee redaction rather than hide something, that I can guarantee redaction on the security level? Because there's a big disjoint there.
Yes. So the redaction as a feature, what it's designed for is for data export. The idea being that if you've got your data in MarkLogic, you'd like to provide an export to perhaps do some, give it to a data to do some analysis on. So it's designed into the data export tools, and that's what you're talking about. That you can it's not built into every query. It's built into data export. So I will pull the. My first reaction is, the only reason we didn't do it is because it's impossible. Well, it's more, I can just go on. I'm going to now do exactly what I'll tell you all the reasons why it can't be done. One particular, the way we distinguish redaction from the element security. With element security, we're hiding data from you. With redaction, we're supposed to actually give you some other data. And so the problem with actually generating data is we can't do that we can't like make the indexes change. And so hiding data is hiding indexes. If you want to transform, redaction is essentially transform. We do it as a transform mechanism that as you do a data export, we transform the data using redaction rules. And so if you want to have data in the database represented in a transformed form, you could have the original values hidden, and you can have a transformed or redacted value exposed. That would be using the envelope pattern. But one thing MarkLogic doesn't do is on the fly transforming the documents at the lower level. There are higher levels that we do the transforming. And so we would do transforming on ingest or transforming on export, but we don't build that into the lower levels.
Yeah. And I think this question also brings up another interesting point about how people are planning to use it, and something we're hearing more and more is curated data for analytics processes. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we're hearing a lot is, hey, we do use Hadoop over here. We have our data scientists using it as a analytics sandbox. We like it. We like what it does for us. But the data that we put in there isn't governed. It isn't anonymized. We don't know the provenance and lineage. So can you give us a way of creating a curated data set for our analytics people? And this is another one of the use cases that motivated redaction on export was, mm-hmm. give me this data set now that I can hand off to this other team that they can do analytics work on that is properly anonymized so that I'm not going to get in trouble with Christie's regulators. Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions? Yes, back there.
Hi there. You were talking about the hardware earlier on.
Yeah.
What level are you taking that to? So were you using on-chip computation, decompression at point of usage?
We do on chip. Well, what's on chip now? I mean, pretty much. Right now, I think there's 32 megabytes on chip. So what I'm talking, we compress the data on the disk, and that's actually I'll tell you how encryption became possible. Encryption at rest. So my main objection to the encryption at rest was that it would be too much of a performance hit because it would be, if you're going to read your data off the disk, you have to read it and decrypt it. But one thing that we actually did to help that, it's actually faster to decompress data than it is to decrypt it. So for our encryption at rest, for a lot of the files that we store, we actually compress them now as well as encrypting them. And the whole reason we compress them is it's faster to compress and then encrypt than it is to just encrypt, believe it or not. And so there are probably some use cases if your disk is particularly slow, obviously not if it's a semiconductor disk. Encrypted may be faster than unencrypted. Because maybe reading from the disk is slower. So we do a lot of, I'll call them hacks, but maybe we're doing a lot of things
clever engineering
to decompress. We've added for encryption at rest where our memory mapped files are decompressed, are encrypted and compressed. Also, for those who are really geeky, Our compressed trees are further compressed. Actually big document fragments, we do more compression of them, basically to make them faster. It's pretty much faster to compress something and write it out to disk than it is to just write it out to disk.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Intel is a great partner. We're able to use the technology that they've built into their V3 chipset to increase the performance of the encryption mechanism, and we continue to work with them, provide input and give feedback on things like their 3D cross-point in-memory technology and other things that we could see on the chip in the future that would be valuable. So that's something that's ongoing engagement with the hardware providers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
You talk about having smarter databases. What are your plans for the semantics and RDF triples, and in particular, are you planning to integrate some of those more natively, perhaps, into MarkLogic's, for example, the direction of Provo on provenance ontologies and things like that?
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. I'd say that a couple subtleties about, with our template-driven extraction, I think that that's a technology that we're introducing in MarkLogic, and I would expect us to do a lot more with that. I think it's a new lever for us to use to help with our indexing. The whole idea of the template extraction is now, instead of just ordinary indexing, you can really define your triples and your rows that you can extract from documents. Essentially, a template is you have the template, you'll have a document, together you can say what's in the indexes. We have some pretty simple mechanisms built into the current release. I could imagine it growing and having a lot more capability. One thing we try to do there is a priority in the template-driven extraction, since it happens at indexing time, is we need it to perform well for indexing to perform well. And so it's a pretty limited language, but there is always this pressure to make it more and more capable as it becomes more and more useful. And so I could imagine templates going from simple syntactic templates to actually be semantic templates is more elaborate templating technology than looking at the structure. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. My question is more about the support for the development tools on MarkLogic. With version 9, we now have this IntelliSense on the Q console, which is nice. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, for example, we don't have a proper compiler that would work with multiple modules that will detect inconsistencies among the modules. I know there is some third-party support for such things, but in general, what is your view on providing developer tools as part of the product, and your views on the xQuery language and its future?
Yeah, I think that as Joe mentioned, there's a definite emphasis that we're planning in MarkLogic 10 on tools. So I would certainly imagine, and Query Console is one of our front developer tools, and so I could imagine improvements there. Do you have anything?
Well, I'll let you answer the xQuery part,
Yeah.
but also mention that we are working again with, as you I think pointed out, we are working with third parties who are also developing tools. There's a debugger plugin for Intellij that we're working on. I don't know if it's available yet in GitHub, but if it's not, it will be soon. And we're going to be continuing to invest in those areas to make the development ecosystem around MarkLogic fuller and more complete.
Yeah. xQuery is our first language in MarkLogic, and certainly most of the field, most engineering in MarkLogic is doing xQuery. But I would like to definitely make a plug here that from my point of view, JavaScript is an equal. And so what we do a lot of in MarkLogic is trying to expose capability in JavaScript as well. I think that when we talk about Optic, Optic is an API, and we designed it as an API so that you can use it from xQuery or JavaScript. It's somewhat agnostic of the language. But xQuery is still pretty powerful. I would say that if you're using XML in MarkLogic, then xQuery is the way to do it. It has fantastic capabilities for XML. If you're storing JSON in MarkLogic, then JavaScript is a natural choice for that as well. Yeah, xQuery is not going away as any more than XML is going away. It's definitely there. We are always working on improving it, but there's also JavaScript too.
So here's a pretty cool thing, or at least it was cool to me. We have a customer, a pretty traditional customer in the manufacturing industry, not one that you would think of as a sort of cutting-edge IT shop. And they came in and they built a 3-tier app on MarkLogic that was JavaScript and JSON all the way down. So they went with a completely modern approach, Angular at the web tier, Node.js at the middleware tier, and JSON and JavaScript within the database. Mm-hmm. And it worked really well, and it was great also for them because it's like ORM. What's ORM? It's the same object model all the way down. It's the same language all the way up and down the stack. So it was really great, and it's great to see, even a traditional IT shop, not somebody who you would think of as, being bleeding edge, adopting that technology because they sort of saw the value of maintaining that stack all the way across.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I like the concept of smart databases. Yeah. So maybe last year we heard MarkLogic will be the most secure database. Maybe next year we will hear that MarkLogic is the smartest database. Yeah. But going through that development, so you shared some insight what you maybe plan for the next releases. And my question is it because you told me that some features of MarkLogic were also copied by competitors already, like open source databases and so. Is it also in your engineering team that you look around the technology which is around you? Like, do you consider blockchain technology for creating a more distributed and more like more resistant system in the future?
So kind of I'll give a distributed answer to that question because so I think that I guess imitation is a form of flattery. So I am flattered by seeing people trying to re-implement MarkLogic and having various degrees of success. What I would really, it's a strategy. It really is a product strategy in MarkLogic to basically out-engineer our competition, no matter who our competition is. And I'm really serious about that. We think we are as good at database engineering as anybody. And so we see that as a strength, and we see that as an advantage, and so that's definitely how we plan our releases. If we stand still, then our competition will catch up with us. So that's definite. That's our strategy. Connected with that strategy is knowing what's important to do, and that's why we actually really love these conferences, because we want to hear from you what you think is important to do. And so that in the topic of blockchain, I think what's important for blockchain is actually to hear from our customers, perhaps in the banking community, what are they looking for in a database to help them with the blockchain development. I think that what we want to do is to do something useful, and so certainly for blockchain, we're open for ideas about what would help our customers implement blockchain stuff.
Yeah, and I would just add, if a customer asks us for a technology, we always ask why. Yeah. So, if somebody comes to us and says, when are you going to implement blockchain? We'll ask you, why do you want blockchain? And we're not trying to be smart. We're trying to understand why. Because if you come back and say, well, what we really care about is non-repudiation, and we hear that from a lot of people, then we'll understand that we need to do something about non-repudiation. Might be blockchain, might be something else. But what's important to us is kind of understanding what the fundamental thing is that you're trying to achieve, so that then we can put technologies in the light of the requirements. So even though we're all technologists, we try not to go be focused on the shiny object. We try and be focused on what's actually going to help the largest numbers of our customers and what they're really after, and then look at what's the right technology to address it. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to ask another question
since
we're here. I'll stop in a minute, sorry. I'm going to go back to JavaScript since you plugged it. Let's go back to MarkLogic 8, JavaScript. You have lots of nice features in there with JavaScript is baked into it. Many of the most useful functions are already mapped into the MarkLogic xQuery functions or the other libraries within CTS and whatnot. But when you're using it and you get into it a little deeper and you do things like amping, you realize there's some sort of glue layer in there. There's some trickery that has to happen because it's not really totally baked into MarkLogic because the interpreter's outside of it. And then you go and you switch from MarkLogic 9 to ES6, which is applaud you great. There's a lot of reasons for that, but match MarkLogic perfectly, and that makes sense. But there's a lot of it's been a journey with JavaScript so far. Are you satisfied where it is now?
Yeah. Well,
that's basically it. And where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I'll answer that. Our JavaScript implementation is not just xQuery with curly braces. Okay, I think that's one, and semicolons. I guess I should have said semicolon. And I think it's important to have that. I mean, it's actually probably easier to use JavaScript in MarkLogic having never used xQuery in MarkLogic. Because the way we use JavaScript, we're really using it more as xQuery was written by database people as a query language, and so there's a lot of declarativeness about it that, frankly, I don't like. I like JavaScript because it's more of a mechanical. The way to use JavaScript in MarkLogic is we have the built-in operations and you have the JavaScript engine. And I think the best way is to know what the built-in operations are and to know what we call them wrapped objects. You probably have a good idea about what they are in JavaScript, and understand the JavaScript engine. We use the V8, Google V8 JavaScript engine because it's really fast, really powerful. And so because of that, there are things that we can't go in there and change the semantics of the language, and we don't want to. So more of the approach is when you're using JavaScript in MarkLogic, you're really controlling MarkLogic with JavaScript. It's not a query language, it's JavaScript. And that you write queries in JavaScript, and you can use, this is what I meant by with the Optic API, is the Optic API, I guess I'll get really gritty here. The way you do searches in MarkLogic with CTS queries is, you construct this query data structure and then you search with it. Optic is very much like that. You construct a plan and then you execute the plan. And you can construct the plan in XQuery, or you can construct the plan in JavaScript. And we have these JavaScript libraries to make it idiomatically easy to do that. But if you're thinking about that, that's the best way to think about it. I want to create a plan and then I want to run it. And because when you do that, it can turn out to be really powerful, because if you really know what you're doing, then you're using JavaScript, the language, to get there. And so, yeah, it's a little different than the XQuery, and it's a little more JavaScripty. But we are intentionally not getting in there and changing the semantics of the language or adding hooks. So the way we do amps is literally you wrap a function with another function, and that's a kind of a JavaScripty way of doing it. So that's why things don't look as slick or built in as XQuery, but that's intentional. Yeah.
So you asked if we were satisfied. This engineering team is rarely satisfied. Yeah. So they build something, we do a release, we celebrate for about 5 minutes, yeah, and then it's back to the next thing. Mm-hmm. So, and I guarantee you, as happy as we are about where we are with JavaScript, Justin McCaig sitting over there has a list as long as his arms of things that he wants to do to improve it. So there's more of that coming in the future. Okay, we're down to 12 seconds, so that's close enough. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you, all of you, for coming and sharing your day with us. If you were at the MarkLogic University sessions yesterday, that's great. Please go to the workshops tomorrow. I think you'll find those really valuable. And we've got a reception tonight, so we hope to see you all there in just a minute. Yeah. Thanks.